Hey, it's Jeremy from OpticHouse.com. So this is part 2 of Pain and Hope. I decided to try ruling the borders in with a brush simply because since this is a commission piece, a lot of times my commissions have a rougher, looser quality because they're done faster than my comic pages. So I thought, let me try it with a brush, see how it works. I still have not mastered the technique of getting them perfectly smooth, but that's fine for this piece because that's not what I was going for. This piece definitely is more organic and rougher and looser. Although it does have a lot more detail in it than there usually are in the commissions, only because I wanted to experiment with a little bit of a technique. There's an illustrator named Franklin Booth. I want to say he's from the early 20th century. I can't remember the exact dates. I still haven't been able to get a good art book on him. I've just sort of looked at a lot of his work online, but he's one of those guys that if you look at like the detailed hatching that someone like Frank Cho, from the comics industry, if you're familiar with his work, some of that detailed hatching that he does, or even someone like Bernie Wrightson, Franklin Booth is the guy who brought that into a lot of prominence in terms of doing a lot of hatching to create volume. Although even then, you could go back even further to somebody like Gustave Doré. But my whole goal here was I knew that I wanted to have a piece that had a dark side and a light side because this image is supposed to illustrate a dichotomy between hope and pain. And so I thought, obviously the pain side is going to be darker. And I tried to limit how much color I use in commissions and have it mainly be a black and white ink drawing. So I thought, why don't I experiment with using texture as tone? Something I've been thinking about. I mean, obviously, cross-hatching is a pretty common thing in a lot of artists' work. And on this one, the cross-hatching doesn't really communicate texture as much as it is purely a tonal thing. But I've also been thinking about a lot in my comic pages where if I have a background or an area that is darker or lighter, like let's say it's a wagon, the surface that's facing away from the light, to try and use, instead of just adding gray tones and making it darker, to try and use the wood grain of that wagon and just add a lot more grain on the dark side and then very little grain on the side facing the light and then a moderate amount in the mid-tone for the area that is slightly turning away. And actively making the texture of that object work as the tone to kind of push areas back and bring them forward, make them represent the areas that are facing toward or away from the light. And while this is hatching purely for hatching's sake, what I'm doing in this piece, I'm kind of playing with that idea and I guess thinking about how I'm going to let it play out in future pages. And it's also very relaxing. It's soothing to just sit there and, kind of cover this thing with a bunch of hatch marks. There's something very meditative about it, as long as you can kind of keep your mind focused enough to make sure that the lines are still conveying the direction that the form is turning toward and away from the light. Because you can't just get lost in putting lines in there just for the sake of lines. I think I might have noodled a little bit, but considering the way that this overall piece is working out, the noodling wasn't to the degree that it spoiled or broke anything. Anyway, I will continue with more the next part of this. I can't remember if it's going to be 3 parts or 4. I did a whole bunch of videos. I pretty much documented the entire creation of this thing. Anyway, that's it for now. Check out my website, optichouse.com, and go be creative.